right. So, well, I guess we'll start with the title. Might as well, right? Preparing content for next generation learning. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll know exactly what we mean by that. What is next generation learning? Is it just a buzzword? Sure, maybe. But what can you actually do as publishers, as content creators, as other users or creators of content? How can you make your stuff ready for what's going to be happening in the future? We're all thinking about the future now, right? So, a little bit of background. Well, first of all, what is learning metadata, right? Huge topic. So, who here knows this alphabet soup? LLM, DC, MLR, LRMI, oh my god. Okay, so we have one person who knows the various number of other educational metadata standards out there already, right? LOM is out of IEEE, DC is Dublin Core, which most of you have probably heard of, Dublin, Ohio, not Dublin, Ireland. MLR is out of ISO, LRMI, which is the project that Michael and I are working on, along with tons of others, but who we are representing. And oh my god, is just, oh my god. So why now? Why are we talking about this topic specifically? You know, metadata is a perennial issue, but why is it actually important now? Why am I talking about it? It's not only talking about important things, right? So there's an intersection of three really major opportunities happening right now in this perfect storm. First is curriculum standards, right? Who has heard of Common Core? Okay, few, good. Who has heard of schema.org? Good. That's a better number than sometimes. And then there's other resource registries out there like the Learning Registry and OER Commons and other types of aggregators of metadata about content, not actually content aggregators, but metadata about content. So those are kind of your discovery vehicles out there. So with these three things, and LRMI is actually an overlap between them all, that creates a major opportunity that we can seize right now. So for those of you that don't know what's going on with these three circles, so Common Core is the, how to best politically put it, the CCSSO, Chiefs Council States Curriculum, whatever, the 50 states education people came together and created a standard on math and English language arts. They're also going to roll out physics in the near future as well. So it's basically things like student knows how to do X, Y, and Z, right? Very straightforward-ish type standard out there. Hopefully will be here for the long term. Schema.org is a collaboration between Google, Bing, Yahoo, and Yandex. For those who don't know Yandex, it's the big Russian search engine. So the big search engines, all of them pretty much, right? They came together and created and codified an ontology, a set of vocabulary terms for marking up web pages. There's been other ontologies before. This will hopefully be or will undoubtedly be the 800-pound gorilla in that world. So, we're talking about the web, first and foremost. We're not talking about your backend database, we're talking about the web in this discussion. So, what is schema.org? And I told you. So why do we need a standard here? And do you want to do this one? Or?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Greg and I sort of go back and forth.
Yeah.
This is in real life too, we do that. So why do we need a standard? You know, if you take a look, so I'm diabetic, and I feel like, you know, hi, I'm Michael, I'm diabetic. You know, I look at a recipe, I look at what's actually included, and I can tell you a little bit about that. But if I want to be actually a thoughtful consumer, this doesn't help me a lot. I know this is good because it has bacon, but other than that, I know nothing else really about sort of the details of it. The good news is that in the last 15, 20 years, we've seen the adoption of standards around sort of how do I look at the nutritional value of that? How do I understand what it is that I'm actually consuming? How many of you actually read these things on the back of what you purchase and eat? Well, that's good. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, you're much more informed because I can't tell what the heck is in the things that I'm buying otherwise. And so LRMI intends to do exactly the same thing for instructional resources. which is I can look at it, I can look at the table of contents, I can see what's in the book, I can see what's actually in the website, I can look at that, but what I don't know is the instructional intent. I don't understand all of the other sort of underlying instructional goals that are part of that. This helps make that more explicit and make that more evident.
So right, this all basically started, you can trace it back to June 2nd, 2011. That's when schema.org was launched. There's a huge political history there that we can go into later in the Q&A if you really, really want to, but basically that's when this this collaboration between the search engines started. When they started, this is a screenshot of the type hierarchy, right? All the different things that you can describe in schema.org. Well, actually, this is it. It's quite large. It describes a lot of different things. You can't read that, obviously, but what it really focused on were things that Google, Bing, and Yahoo make and Yandex make their money off of initially, right? The big verticals, as so to speak, for Google and the others are shopping indexes or verticals, right? It's hairstylists, it's things that you're like electronic software, stuff like that, right? So there's a pretty decent vocabulary in that huge long list about those topics, but there wasn't anything for education. Can you raise your hand if anyone knows either of those words? Awesome, the same crew. I like it, guys. So this is just to say that schema.org and LRMI, and thus LRMI, you can mark up your web pages in either microdata or RDFA. If you've already started tagging with one, you can continue to go with it. Most likely you've probably done RDFA in the past. You can stay with RDFA because there's a new version of the syntax out, perfectly fine. So this is basically saying with geeky words, don't worry, you can mark it up with what you're doing now. Here's an example of what it looks like. Again, we don't need to go into details here, but this is what microdata actually looks like. Marking up an HTML web page with schema.org and LRMI metadata about it. You can see the things that are, well, the very top of it is highlighted. You can see something that says like item prop, learning resource type, and then textbook, right? So you're saying this thing is a textbook. That's the type of learning resource it is. That's the kind of idea what we're getting at here. So why are we talking about this? Why mark up your web pages? Why do all this extra work of metadata in general? Well, initially, I mean, and primarily improve search results, right? The search engines do notice these things. They index the metadata about the web pages that they index. It goes into their big, huge databases up there in the cloud, and they make decisions based off of that metadata. Now, one example that is kind of the fun example within the LRMI community is recipes, a potato salad example. If you search Google for potato salad, it knows based off of the search results, right? Like Google, as it's displaying those search results to you, it's saying, all these things that are coming up in these search results have this metadata about recipes in them, I've just noticed. So this person must be searching for a recipe because all these are recipes coming up. So I could help out that user and show them extra search faceted search terms for recipes, right? There's a couple steps there, but they can do that pretty quickly. And that's the power of metadata, right? You can have all these little pullouts of how many ratings and the summary and all that, but then on the left-hand side, this is actually moved around a little bit in the latest version of Google, but you can see things like ingredients and any cook time, like how long it takes to cook the specific recipe. That's all in that metadata. It's marked up in those web pages. It's the only way Google knows how long it takes to make potato salad. It doesn't know that just intrinsically, right? So you have to tell it. So this is we're talking about how to tell it, right? So, but within this huge big ontology back in June 2nd, 2011, there wasn't anything about learning. There was absolutely nothing about learning, in fact. So that's where LRMI comes in, the Learning Resource Metadata Initiative. This was, or is, a collaboration between Creative Commons, my organization, and the Association of Education Publishers, which Michael works with and Dave works for. For those of you that don't know us, Creative Commons, we are the providers of the free open licenses that you can apply to any copyrighted material out there so that others know how they can and cannot use your material in this digital age. The Association of Education Publishers, you probably already know if you're at this conference. They're the more than a trade association for education publishers. They do a lot more. It's, you know, calling them trade association is actually kind of not enough. So it was actually a really good partnership, right? It's between, everyone in this education sphere. It wasn't just the open community, it wasn't just the commercial community, it was everyone. Because if you do something for one and not for both, it's gonna not work out, and I'm probably taking too long. So, the specification development. Here's just a list of names. If you know them, cool, you should go talk to them. This is just to say it was a very varied group, a very full group of expertise here. We had people from education, we had people from previous standards development, and we had publishers, and we had people from the open community. So it's a very mixed technical working group. This is the people that sat on the phone calls that I led and had to get them to do work to create this specification. So, without any further ado, the terms. What is the actual spec? All right, so these are the main terms for the most part. And the first one I'll skip because it's kind of the killer feature. The second one, educational use, right? What is the purpose of the work in the context of education? It's an assignment, is it group work, that kind of thing. Interactivity type. This is actually limited to 3 values: expositive, active, and mixed. You know, is it passive? Are you just sitting there being lectured to like you guys are right now? Is it active as in like a working group thing, or is it a mixture of the two? Is it based on URLs? The next one, you know, does it pull in pieces from other resources? Learning resource type. So is it a presentation? Is it a handout? Time required, fairly obvious for the most part what this term means. Like obviously a video has a time, but then also like the average time that a worksheet or a homework assignment takes, or the not normal time that a worksheet or homework takes. And then typical age range. So this could be a single number or a range of numbers. We went with age just initially for the international aspect. We didn't call it typical grade level or something like that, because that's not international. That doesn't apply to the UK and the US at the same time, right? So we needed something that could be cross jurisdiction. But we can get around that with the first term on that is educational alignment. And what that is broken up in the second slide here, is the ability to say this thing that I'm talking about right now, verb, something else. So this thing, like this video, teaches this educational standard, right? Or this video requires the student to know how to do this educational standard. So you could think of it a Khan Academy video that teaches multivariable calculus. I don't think he has that yet, but there's multivariable calculus video. So you could say this video teaches multivariable calculus. There's a standard that specifies that ability, right? And you could also say this video requires students to know single variable calculus before they try the multivariable calculus. It kind of doesn't make sense to do the one before the other. So that's the kind of relationship that you can specify with an LRMI. With that, you can do a lot. And actually, it's not just educational standards. You can also use this term to align something to a grade level. If there's a grade level standard out there, there's a few that specify grade levels for US students or for other jurisdiction students. You can say this thing is for the educational level of 3 in the US or whatever, right? So this is kind of the beauty of the linked open data world, right? Like you can link between different data sets out there about resources, and then you can build up this graph, right? So the long-term goal for what this term is really used for is, say you're Google and you index the web and you see all these different relationships of requires, teaches, all that. Then you can say, huh, these things are all related. All these videos are actually related in some ways. This video comes before this one, comes before this one, comes before this one. And now I can make a graph of how all these videos, actually graph, how all these videos relate. And if there's a student that's over here knows this stuff, but wants to get over there, we can make a map. We can make a map from where they are now to where they want to go, all from metadata. boring stuff, but it can enable that kind of thing happening across the web, not just within silos, but across the web. All right. And the same example again, putting those terms in HTML, we can go through that more later if we really need to. And with that, that's time.
So I just want to say a little bit more about what Greg just shared, and that is that it may be that this kind of metadata available related to these kinds of resources really allows for a more student-driven process, where some of that intelligence, quote unquote, is included within the resource itself. So they can be more active consumers, more thoughtful consumers, more reflective about their learning, and then give teachers the information that they require to be able to really work with them on a more one-to-one basis around the use of those resources. So there's a little bit of that tension between an intentional curriculum, where you've assembled it as a linear process, versus the access to resources that may be from a variety of different places, and really trying to piece them together in a way that really addresses the needs of an individual learner. An example that I found really useful that differentiates LRMI from previous metadata specifications, for those of you who go to MoMA, and this is true in many other museums too, but this happens to be a really good concrete example. You'll actually see over many of the images that they have at the museum, they'll have an actual visual description, which is for people who have disabilities, where it actually gives you vivid detail about the resource itself. It tells you how big it is, it tells you how it was, what kind of materials were used to produce it. It's really a description meant for, that's not particularly artistic in its nature, but it's a description. And that's how much of our metadata works today, right? It tells you how many pages a book has, it tells you the nature of the resource, but not necessarily around its educational use. What we're usually most interested in is this sort of collection, which is about the commentary by the artists, curators, and others about that resource. And that's really what LRMI is trying to get at, is not just about sort of your traditional metadata, versus the exciting kinds of metadata that is the reason why we use those resources and get at the heart of that. So I really, this quote, I think really says it, tells it all. And for those of you who do a lot of metadata work, you'll appreciate this. There is nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept. And to me, that's a lot of what actually, see, nodding of heads, because if you've been there, you know what that's like. It's really about really trying to describe that. And I think who could know that better than Ansel Adams around sort of trying to make sense out of that and trying to get a sharp description around it. Greg talked a little bit about the LRMI properties, and I'll try to say a little bit more here. Along the left side, you'll see actually some of the general terms that are required from schema.org. There are a number of other terms that are not educational in their nature. So you can look at all these: title, URL, description, image, topic. I mean, all of these things that could be used for anything, whether it's about learning or not. And then you've got the items that are on the right side there, which are the educational terms: intended and user role, educational use, time required, typical age range. Greg went through these, of course: interactivity type and learning resource type, and then we get those competency-related terms as well. So I'll go into a little bit more. This is where I find people really want to know a little bit more about the terminology itself. I do want to give a little disclaimer here, and that is that the schema.org community typically does not define these vocabularies. They typically say they're left undefined. The community gets to define them for themselves. I've been in the K-12 education marketplace for 30 years now, and I can tell you that if you get 15 people together, you'll get 20 answers to any question that you happen to ask. And my experience is that we end up, for those of you who are educators, who have that background, we end up being a group of divergent rather than convergent thinkers in many ways. And you see that through, whole language learning. I mean, sort of communities that end up sort of battling over pieces. And so we thought it was important to come up with some standard sets of vocabularies, but you're not necessarily tied to these. So you can see intended user roles, anything from administrator, parent, teacher, out to a team of people working together. And again, these are multiple select fields. So you could actually have multiple. So it could be a team of teachers. So it allows you to be able to indicate who's the consumer of that. Educational use, and again, I apologize for how small they are, but This is by no means meant to be the perfect list, and we urge you to participate to continue to grow this and build some other pieces. One could spend forever arguing these. There are at least two other properties that have the same issues. But we'd actually tested these over a period of 8 years with 300 publishers. So we know that they work for many, many resources, but they may not be necessarily perfect. But you can see how the learners engaged with that. This is the one that Greg was talking about that acquired from, I think it's Long is where this comes from. So it's a rather arcane way of talking about interactivity. If you're involved with creating interactive learning tools, you'll be horribly disappointed in only being able to select from those three. And so we intend, so somebody nodded their head there as well, good. I know I am. And so we intend to, again, see this continue to grow. And again, it's meant to be a community, so we urge you to participate. Media type, there's some of these, I love these sort of like flash from the past. CDI, there you go. But there's some newer media types there as well. And you know, for those of you, again, who spend any time in the classroom, let's see here, transparencies, I mean, they're all still there, right? None of this stuff ever disappears. So we want to make sure that we can capture any of that and all of that, since you don't want to create a silo for just web-based materials and then other things, because it just becomes confusing. Typical age range, this remains controversial. I'm of the camp that says I'd rather just bound this by saying here's the lower boundary, here's the upper boundary on age range, but at this point at least they've gone with these ranges. The biggest fight that I've had is the fact that I indicated they overlap because it's hard to say definitively. Does second grader go with a fifth grade, with a second 2-year-old go with a 5-year-old, or with a younger child? Depends on the child and how they work with that. So again, there's no definitive truth here, but again, some ways to be able to define this. Learning resource type, activity, audio, broadcast, you'll see different kinds of media. What's interesting if you do the semantic look at this, however, is that a lot of these terms, of course, carry baggage from how they've been used previously. So field trip, everybody thinks about getting on a bus. Well, in fact, increasingly, a field trip is something you would do virtually. And so it has some interesting learning issues associated with these. The next one, alignment type, that Greg referenced, you'll notice it has some of the traditional types of alignments: assesses, teaches, requires. Requires being that it's a prerequisite for something. But then we end up with other ones, for those of you who work with metametrics around lexiles or quantiles or any of the other aisles. You can get to reading comprehension levels and other kinds of measures, all of which are considered standards, and it requires some sort of alignment type. So this is a rather robust way to approach this. It ends up being confusing a little bit to sort of your layperson educator, somebody who thinks about curriculum standards. It ends up being a little bit perplexing, so just beware as you share that with others in your organization that it really requires a little bit more effort to explain the real richness that underlies this alignment. So the actual act of doing the correlation, well, we'll see how old people are to see if you remember this. I was at Apple for 8 years. This was early in my career. Anybody remember this commercial, this ad? Nobody? Good, okay. This was an ad for the 2GS. What I always liked about this is that this is a fellow who is up at a chalkboard. How many of you remember a chalkboard? No. And what he's doing is, with the right hand, he's doing mathematical equations, and with the left hand, he's drawing. And for those of you who have ever done any tagging, this is exactly what the act of tagging is like. It's both a right brain and a left brain experience. It requires both the science and the art of the process. So I think you use this image as you're going through and doing that. So the process itself actually consists of first starting out with tagging the resource, as we've already talked about it, using either the open source tagger that's available, what used to be the Shared Learning Collaborative, but it now is referred to In Bloom. Have you ever heard that name of that company, In Bloom now? Don't call them and order flowers for your spouse for tomorrow. That's all I can say. In Bloom was a Gates-funded project, and they had actually funded an open source tagger to describe resources by LRMI. So you can use that tagger that'll be available, or is even available today, and go through your resources. We, Educational Systemics, actually can help you think through your resources and how to tag that, and we're actually funded by the Gates Foundation through the AAP to help you with that, so there's no cost to you. It sounds like it should be on TV at 2 a.m., but there's no cost to you, the shipping and handling. Next is to then publish those resources, and again, the tagger will let you do that. And where would you publish those? Certainly you can publish them internally, create an XML or a JSON or an HTML representation of that metadata, but really probably the most interesting place to publish it is out to the Learning Registry. How many of you know the Learning Registry? Not biblically. How many? Okay, there we go. So the Learning Registry is a project of the U.S. Department of Education, Department of Defense. Who else is involved with that?
Gates, kinda.
Gates, kind of. Well, Gates, you just assume, just put Gates, kind of, at the end of all of these things. And the Learning Registry is really the place where it's important to recognize the difference between a repository and a registry. Where a repository is a keeper of the resource itself, a registry is just a keeper of the metadata about the resource. And in the case of the Learning Registry, it really is sponsored by the Department of Ed. It's a distributed index of learning metadata associated with learning resources. And it's really the next generation way of looking at finding instructional resources. And there are about 9 states right now that are making use of the Learning Registry, only beginning early use of that, but they are dedicated to using the Learning Registry to inform their purchasing of resources and alignment of those resources to the Common Core standards and how do you make those kinds of purchase decisions. So it's a pretty important place to be if you're interested in selling products. If you're more part of the open source community, certainly a great way to be able to distribute and create awareness. And then be able to support search around that as well. So the process really is one of moving from left to right here in terms of tagging, publishing, and then searching. We found that going through third-party tagging, there's about a 2-hour formal training that's required probably within your organization. We also suggest that if you're going to be doing tagging, that you pre-tag some resources and do some intercoder reliability, whether if you're doing it internally. We're funded through the end of March? Through the end of March. That's late breaking news. We got an extension because of how many resources are coming in. But we're actually funded to do tagging of resources for you. That's more kind of with you. So if you wanted to dabble in this, we would help you identify that metadata, and then we can actually work with you to do that tagging through the end of March. After that date, we do expect for another year at least to be funded to help support you in that process anyhow. But you'll be doing the tagging. Honestly, it's not that tough, and the more you know the resource, the closer you are to it, the better prepared. But again, an average of 25 minutes per resource. There are ways to improve that, and we can talk about that in terms of workflow within your organization. And we break it up into about 15 minutes in the tool itself, and then 10 minutes of prep around queuing the data, looking at XML posting, and the notes and other things that go with that. So it can be a time-consuming process, but there are ways to improve that. Greg?
So in summary, though, basically, so I've been working with about 7 or 8-ish OER platforms, so open educational resource platforms, things from connections to sailor.org to OER Commons to Merlot and all those others, right? All the platforms that allow you to either post stuff or to refer to other open educational resources. And I've been helping them implement LRMI. In this end, the more stuff that's automated in a way, the easier it is for you. As 2 examples, connections being one, there's a couple people here representing today. Their backend is basically an XML transitioning to something else, but it's already fairly well marked up, right? And you just do a mapping between what you have now and what LRMI is, right? This term is that term, this term is that term, right? There might be some ambiguity, but honestly not a whole lot. And then with that, you just kind of edit the template that generates all the different web pages, and you're done, right? Fairly straightforward. Not to pick on sailor.org, but sailor.org, who here knows sailor.org? It's a foundation-supported, the Sailor Foundation, this is a single project foundation kind of thing, that creates courses using online resources. So let's say, here's Anthro 101, for the first section, go watch this video, read this paper, do this homework kind of thing. But they don't create the resources, they just link to them, right? their platform is WordPress, and all those pages are just text, and fancy CSS text, but just text. So it's not built from a database, so there's no automated way of marking up the thousands of pages they have, because those pages are basically created by hand. They have templates, but not really in the way that you think of it. So they're going to take a lot of work to get all their stuff marked up, whereas connections, it's not going to take much work at all, really. So that's kind of the two extremes, right? Where you are is always a little bit different. What your creation and workflow process is, where in that process do you want to do this is always a concern, and what you need to figure out. But in the end, too long didn't read. The more automated you are, the better, basically. Right, tools.
Yeah, let me just add one little piece to that, and that is that it's really important to recognize that LRMI, we worked very, very hard to make sure, the intent was that schema.org this would be really just tagging web-based resources. But we're realistic that web-based resources, although very dominant now in schools, are not by any means, nor would they ever be completely what's being used. I don't want kids to learn how to dribble a basketball online. I mean, I think there's something to be said about doing it in person. That's true for any number of different activities. So you can mark up non-digital resources as long as you have a landing page or something that's descriptive of the actual activity that's available online. So it does require that there is some digital instantiation of that product, even if it's just a landing page that describes it. So those are, again, strategies that we're happy to help you with in thinking that through. The Tagger application continues to go through a painful growing process as it serves many masters. And if you want me to unpack that statement, you'd have to come up here and I can tell you with confidence. But it's been an ongoing process to make this happen. Here's the latest version. You can begin to see, it's a little bit hard, it's even hard for me to see it right here. You can see the ability on the far left side, you would include a URL that describes that resource. That's part of that identifier, so it has to have a URL associated with it. And then you can associate it with all the different other metadata that we've already described here, which are, again, pull-down menus with a controlled vocabulary or the ability to add your own vocabulary there. And these are multiple select areas, so you can select multiple as you're going through it. Again, multiple resources listed here. Here, English language, you can tell when it was created, the subject, et cetera, et cetera. Again, many of you probably already have metadata repositories where you already have this. The mapping process, as Greg said, can be trivial, although can also be rather convoluted. So we've worked with several organizations around that as well. This is actually adding the educational alignment that we've already discussed, and this is the most recent version. And it gets a multiple to multiple kind of connection that can occur here. Also just want to point out that we're also doing some work outside of the US trying to include standards other than simply the Common Core. And Greg made tangential reference to the new next generation science standards and others. So we're looking at ways to accommodate those and make sure that we have GUIDs or unique identifiers so that we can point to those standards references as well. AP support, phase one was actually the development of the spec and helping drive the tech committee, but phase two is just ending the end of next month because we got a 1-month extension. We have apparently somewhere over 8,000 resources still in the queue that have to be tagged. So one of the questions people have asked me is, well, are people interested? Is this being adopted? The answer is yes, people are. And we're moving this ahead as fast as we possibly can. And in fact, we're doing some things in the next phase to try to accelerate some of that. But there's a lot of interest and a lot of resources being added to it. So we have a lot in the queue. We've been doing a lot of awareness building, proof of concept, collaboration on the tagger, as I've already mentioned. But most importantly, I think, is really the hands-on publisher tagging support that we've provided. We've done a lot of one-on-one with companies around trying to help them understand within the organization what it means to tag and how to do it through that tagging and mapping process. So happy to help you with that kind of support. We also provide a metadata template, a way to take your existing materials and include that in such a way that we can then vet that with you. In phase 3, that's going to be coming up starting next month or the month after, continuing many of the things we've done in the past, but those last 3 items are really the most important. One is we're going to shift from actually doing tagging for you to doing tagging with you, which I still think makes the most sense. Another one is we're going to have a service providers program, so that when you go to companies that you rely on maybe today to do tagging, maybe doing correlations to standards and others, we expect they're going to offer this kind of LRMI service for you, and we have a number of them interested in that as well. And the last one, and I won't say much about it, is a test environment for publishers to figure out how to work with the Learning Registry and how to make your resources evident. So again, that'll be sponsored, driven by the Association of Educational Publishers, and you're welcome to come talk to me or to Greg or to Dave about that. Sorry, 4-letter word starts with D, Dave, okay, about that after. So here's really, what are the implications of LRMI? I mean, I like to think about this as sort of the age of discovery, you know, which we'd all like to think it was just people going out on ships trying to view the world. Well, in fact, sure, okay, that was great fun. We ventured across the ocean, but why did anybody bother to do it? The other part is the commerce that's associated with it. So it's both about improving the discoverability of your product, so that means making them available so that they can be found online. You want to chime in?
5.
Oh, okay. Okay, we'll go fast. So you can discover them, but also so that you can engage, I think, in more thoughtful commerce, particularly as we see the shifts in the market that are taking place. At one time, of course, you would purchase one resource thinking it was sort of the best fit for everybody in the class, increasingly now looking at ways to really address the needs of individual learners and make your resources relevant and move to new use models. It's important to recognize that, that the LRMI is not just for topical application. It really is meant for use within your organization as well. We find that the most powerful implementations of this are really around capturing and communicating the instructional intent of the resources that you're creating. So doing that early in the conceptualization process and using that to pervade the whole development process is absolutely key. And it really helps create consistent product and also helps market that product more consistently in the long run. It's really, and this really gets to the crux of the matter, and that is really, it's underlying all of this is the real shift, the move from thinking about resources to thinking about learning. Clearly, we think about resources as publishers that we want to make available, but ultimately it's about the learning that it supports and that it drives. It's about moving from thinking about institution as being the consumer to really thinking about the learner as the consumer. And as we begin to stop staying away from just the resource in the way we describe it as an institutional resource, but rather as a learning resource, it's a much, much more powerful metaphor and a way to really get at who the learner is. It's a movement from media to thinking about how do we engage the learner, not so much about the nature of the media, but about the nature of the engagement. And lastly, it's a move away from simply adopted materials, but really to discoverable materials. And I think increasingly that's the direction that we see happening in education. And I think it's good. I think the question that we get from a lot of different companies is how do we move there? How do we make that sustainable? And I think the LRMI is a critical component of that. So how can your organization participate? In a number of ways, I've already mentioned them. Certainly, we can work with you to help gain support for LRMI within your organization. We have a number of ways we can help support you in that process. We can present to you. It's not unusual that we'll present to either leadership in an organization, we'll present to editorial teams, and work with you to really look at your particular product needs and move that ahead. So to that end, this is Greg, and I'm Michael. And we have Dave Gladney. Stand up, Dave. I want them to see your face. There you go. This is Dave Gladney. Tila Evans couldn't be here, but Tila Evans is the one who makes it all happen on my team. So that's LRMI, and that's how we're going to help support moving education ahead.